Imagine lying in bed at 3 in the morning, eyes wide open, heart pounding against your ribs, and you cannot understand why your body refuses to let you rest because you did everything right. You ate a clean dinner, you dimmed the lights, you put your phone away, you even drank that chamomile tea your friends swore would change your life. And yet here you are, staring at the ceiling in the dark, feeling a strange hum of electricity running through your veins, a tension in your jaw that you did not consciously create, a heat in your chest that is not quite a hot flash but something deeper, as if your entire nervous system has been plugged into a socket and someone refuses to pull the cord. And then morning comes, and the woman in the mirror looks 5 years older than the woman you remember being just 18 months ago, with hollows under her eyes that concealer cannot fill, skin that has lost its firmness in a way that feels sudden and cruel, and a thickening around your waist that appeared despite eating less than you have in decades. If this sounds familiar, then what I am about to share with you today could be the most important thing you hear this year, because there is a single symptom, one that hides behind a dozen other complaints, that is simultaneously destroying your ability to sleep and accelerating the rate at which every cell in your body ages. And most women going through menopause have no idea it is happening to them. I want to tell you about a woman named Margaret. She was 54 when she walked into my practice, and the first thing I noticed was how she carried herself. Shoulders curled forward, arms crossed over her midsection as if trying to hold herself together, eyes carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who has not slept properly in years. Margaret was a high school English teacher, the kind of woman always described as vibrant, the one who organized holiday potlucks and stayed late to help struggling students. But sitting across from me that afternoon, she looked hollowed out from the inside, and when I asked her what had changed, her voice cracked and she said something I have heard hundreds of times since. I feel like I am watching myself age in a time-lapse video, and I cannot make it stop. It had started at 51. Perimenopause announced itself with irregular periods and the occasional night sweat, which she handled with grace. But then came the insomnia, not gentle difficulty falling asleep, but a violent, jolting wakefulness at 2 or 3 in the morning every single night, accompanied by a racing heart, clenched teeth, and a mind spinning through anxieties she did not know she carried during the day. Within 6 months, the physical changes accelerated in a way that stunned her. Her skin, always her quiet pride, smooth, resilient, began to thin and gray as though the light beneath it had been switched off. Her colleagues began asking if she was feeling okay, which is the polite way of saying you look terrible. And then came the weight. 15 pounds concentrated around her midsection despite eating less than at any point in her adult life. Margaret stopped looking in mirrors. She stopped wearing sleeveless tops. She withdrew from social gatherings because she could not bear the thought of anyone seeing what she was becoming. Now here is what I need you to understand, and this is where the story takes a turn that changes everything. Margaret was not dealing with separate problems. The insomnia, the accelerated skin aging, the visceral weight gain, the jaw clenching, the racing heart at 3 in the morning. These were not independent symptoms of menopause happening to coexist in the same body. They were all manifestations of a single underlying physiological disruption, one that most practitioners never test for, one that most women have never even heard of in the context of menopause, and one that, when left unaddressed, does not just make you feel older. It literally, measurably, at the level of your DNA, makes you older. I am not talking about hot flashes. I am not talking about mood swings. I am not even talking about estrogen loss itself, though estrogen is a critical part of this story. What I am talking about is chronic cortisol dysregulation, the silent, invisible, relentless flooding of your body with stress hormones that during menopause spirals out of control in a way that most women never recognize because it disguises itself as everything else. Let me explain exactly what happens inside your body, because once you understand this mechanism, you will never look at your menopause symptoms the same way again. Cortisol is produced by your adrenal glands, and its release is governed by a delicate system called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis. Think of this as a thermostat for stress. When you encounter a threat, your hypothalamus signals your pituitary gland, which signals your adrenals to release cortisol, and when the threat passes, the system shuts itself off. During your reproductive years, estrogen plays a role in this process that almost no one talks about. It acts as a buffer, a gentle hand on the thermostat that prevents it from swinging too high or staying elevated too long. Estrogen helps your brain recognize when cortisol levels are sufficient and sends the signal to stop producing more. It is one of the most elegant protective mechanisms in the female body, and it is one you lose gradually and then suddenly as you enter menopause. When estrogen declines, the HPA axis loses its governor. The thermostat breaks. Cortisol spikes become more frequent, more intense, and critically, much harder to shut off. Your body begins to exist in a state of chronic physiological emergency, not the acute, short-lived stress response that you were designed to handle, but a sustained, grinding, 24-hour flood of cortisol that rewires your biology in ways that are both devastating and, until now, largely invisible to the women experiencing them. Here is where sleep enters the story. Your body has a natural cortisol rhythm that mirrors the cycle of day and night. In a healthy system, cortisol peaks in the early morning. This is called the cortisol awakening response, that natural surge of energy when you open your eyes. From that peak, cortisol gradually declines throughout the day, reaching its lowest point around midnight, precisely when melatonin, your sleep hormone, reaches its highest point. These two hormones exist in a beautifully choreographed opposition. As one rises, the other falls, and this dance creates the architecture of healthy, restorative sleep. But in chronic cortisol dysregulation, this dance is destroyed. The cortisol curve flattens or inverts. Cortisol stays elevated through the evening and into the night, remaining high when it should be at its lowest. And here is the mechanism that explains those 3 a.m. awakenings that Margaret described, that so many of you know intimately. Elevated evening cortisol suppresses a specific enzyme in your pineal gland called AANAT, arylkylamine N-acetyltransferase, the enzyme responsible for converting serotonin into melatonin. Without adequate AANAT activity, your pineal gland cannot produce enough melatonin to sustain deep sleep, which means you may fall asleep from exhaustion, but cannot stay asleep because your brain is bathed in cortisol at the very moment it needs melatonin. The cortisol microsurges that occur during the night, tiny spikes your adrenals release every 60 to 90 minutes in a dysregulated system, are what jolt you awake at 2, 3, 4 in the morning with that racing heart and inexplicable alertness. You are not waking up because of noise or temperature. You are waking up because your own stress hormone is detonating inside your brain, shattering deep NREM sleep, and fragmenting the REM cycles your brain needs for emotional processing and memory consolidation. And here is the vicious part. Poor sleep itself raises cortisol the following day by 37 to 45%. The cortisol that destroyed last night's sleep makes tomorrow's cortisol higher, which destroys the next night more thoroughly, and on in a spiral that feeds itself with merciless efficiency. This is why so many women describe their menopausal insomnia as something that appeared and then never left. They were trapped in a biochemical feedback loop that no amount of sleep hygiene could break. Now, if this were only about sleep, it would be devastating enough. But this is where the aging piece of the story unfolds, and it is, frankly, alarming. Deep inside every cell, at the tips of your chromosomes, there are structures called telomeres, tiny protective caps, like the plastic tips on shoelaces, that prevent your genetic material from unraveling. Every time a cell divides, these telomeres get slightly shorter, and their length has become one of the most reliable biological markers of aging science has identified. When telomeres become critically short, cells enter senescence. They stop dividing, stop functioning properly, and begin releasing inflammatory compounds that damage surrounding cells. This is what aging is at its most fundamental level: the progressive shortening of telomeres and the accumulation of senescent cells that degrade every tissue in your body. Your body has a defense, an enzyme called telomerase that rebuilds and repairs shortened telomeres, essentially turning back the cellular clock. But chronic cortisol elevation does two catastrophic things simultaneously. It increases the oxidative stress that accelerates telomere shortening, pressing the fast-forward button on cellular aging, and it suppresses telomerase activity, disabling the very repair mechanism designed to protect you. Research by Dr. Alyssa Eppel and colleagues has shown that women with chronically elevated cortisol exhibit telomere shortening equivalent to 10 to 17 additional years of biological aging. Meaning a 52-year-old woman with cortisol dysregulation may have cells that function like those of a 62 to 69-year-old, not metaphorically. At the level of her DNA, she is aging faster than time should allow. If this connection between cortisol, sleep, and cellular aging is something you want to understand more deeply, I have put together a comprehensive resource that breaks down these mechanisms and what you can do about them. You will find it linked in the description below this video. But there is still another layer to this story, and it is the one you can see when you look in the mirror, because cortisol is not just aging you at the invisible cellular level. It is aging your skin, your face, your visible body in ways that are both measurable and deeply personal. Cortisol activates a family of enzymes called matrix metalloproteinases, or MMPs, and these enzymes do something almost violent in its directness. They digest collagen, the structural protein that gives your skin its firmness and bounce. Collagen is the scaffolding of your face, the architecture that keeps everything lifted, and cortisol unleashes enzymes that dissolve it. But that is only half the assault, because simultaneously, cortisol suppresses fibroblasts, the cells responsible for producing new collagen, which means existing collagen is being destroyed while your body's ability to replace it is shut down. Demolition and a construction freeze in the same moment. The visible result is skin that thins, sags, and wrinkles at a rate far exceeding what estrogen loss alone would produce. This is why some women age gradually through menopause, while others age suddenly and dramatically. The difference is often not genetics, but the degree of cortisol dysregulation beneath the surface. And then there is the inflammation. You might think cortisol would at least reduce inflammation, and in acute situations, you would be right. But chronic cortisol elevation creates a paradox. When immune cells are exposed to cortisol continuously, they develop cortisol resistance. Similar to insulin resistance, the receptors become desensitized, they stop responding to cortisol's calming signal, and the result is an unchecked release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, C-reactive protein, flooding the body with persistent inflammation that researchers call inflammaging. This inflammatory state accelerates every aging pathway: mitochondrial dysfunction, DNA damage, stem cell exhaustion, and creates a self-reinforcing cycle with visceral fat, because cortisol promotes fat accumulation around abdominal organs, and this visceral fat produces its own inflammatory cytokines, which further dysregulate cortisol, around and around in a spiral, pulling the body deeper into premature aging. This is exactly what was happening to Diane. She was 49, a corporate attorney, divorced, raising her teenage daughter alone, a woman whose identity had been built on competence and fierce self-reliance. When perimenopause began at 47, she dismissed the symptoms the way she dismissed opposing counsel's objections, briskly, with the assumption that willpower would be sufficient. She was wrong. By 49, she was sleeping 3 to 4 fragmented hours per night. She developed persistent joint pain that made climbing stairs feel like an athletic event. Her brain fog became so severe that she sat in meetings unable to follow conversations. A woman who had argued before appellate judges now struggling to remember a client's name. She feared, with a terror she shared with no one, that she was developing early-onset dementia, and her skin had become so thin that she was getting paper cuts from legal documents, tiny slices that took days to heal, as if her body's ability to repair itself had been switched off. Diane told me something I have never forgotten. She said she had started crying in her car every morning in the office parking lot, not from sadness exactly, but from bewildered grief, because the woman she had always been, sharp, capable, unbreakable, seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone she did not recognize. That is the emotional devastation of cortisol dysregulation during menopause. It does not just damage your body, it steals your sense of self. When her practitioner ran a comprehensive cortisol panel, a 4-point saliva test measuring cortisol at morning, noon, evening, and midnight, the results were staggering. Her evening cortisol was 3 times normal. At the hour when cortisol should have been lowest, her adrenals were producing stress hormones as if she were fleeing a predator. Her C-reactive protein was significantly elevated, confirming that chronic cortisol had pushed her immune system into constant self-destructive activation. Her practitioner said something that landed like a physical blow. Your body is in a state of chronic emergency. It has been for years, and it is aging you from the inside out. But here is where the story turns, because what happened to both Margaret and Diane after they addressed the cortisol dysregulation speaks to a truth about the female body that fills me with hope every time I witness it. The body wants to heal. It has not forgotten how. It simply needs the biochemical obstacle removed. Margaret's recovery began with targeted interventions designed to gently restore the cortisol rhythm menopause had disrupted. Phosphatidylserine, a phospholipid shown to blunt elevated evening cortisol, was one piece of the puzzle. Ashwagandha, specifically the KSM66 extract, was another, an adaptogenic herb with strong clinical evidence for reducing cortisol output. Magnesium glycinate before bed calmed the nervous system excitability driving her nighttime awakenings. But perhaps most importantly, Margaret began strategic light exposure. Bright morning sunlight within 30 minutes of waking to anchor the cortisol awakening response, followed by strict dim lighting after sunset. She learned the 4-7-8 breathing technique, a pattern that activates the parasympathetic nervous system and signals the adrenals to reduce cortisol, practicing it every night and every time she woke in the darkness. Within 8 weeks, Margaret was sleeping 6.5 hours continuously for the first time in nearly 3 years. Within 12 weeks, the jaw clenching had stopped and the racing heart no longer jolted her awake. And within 5 months of consistent targeted support for her cortisol rhythm, her skin had regained a warmth and firmness that she had assumed was gone forever. Her waistline had reduced by 3 inches, and the hollows under her eyes had softened to the point where a colleague stopped her in the hallway and said, "Whatever you are doing, keep doing it because you look 10 years younger." Margaret called me that evening and said, through tears, "I feel like I got 5 years of my life back. I feel like myself again." Diane's recovery took longer because her dysregulation was more severe, but the trajectory was equally powerful. Her practitioner built a protocol that included adaptogens, a complete restructuring of her circadian environment, strict light protocols, consistent sleep and wake times, no screens after 8 p.m., and anti-inflammatory nutrition built around omega-3 fatty acids, and the elimination of refined sugars fueling the inflammatory cascade. She learned vagus nerve stimulation exercises and practiced them with the same discipline she had once brought to preparing legal briefs. At 12 weeks, her brain fog lifted. She described it as someone turning the lights back on in a room that had been dim for 2 years. At 6 months, she was sharper than she had been at 40. Her joint pain had resolved. Her skin had regained a texture she had mourned as lost. And she had stopped crying in the parking lot because the woman she recognized as herself had come back. These stories are not outliers. In my practice, I have seen this pattern transform the lives of hundreds of women who had been told that what they were experiencing was simply normal aging that they should accept the insomnia, the skin changes, the weight gain, as inevitable consequences of getting older. What fills me with something close to anger is how many years some of these women suffered because no one thought to measure their cortisol rhythm and show them the correctable truth of what was happening inside their bodies. Here is what I want you to carry with you. Your body is not betraying you. Menopause is not a disease, and you are not broken. A hormonal shift removed the protective buffer keeping your stress response in check, and without it, cortisol runs unchecked, disrupting your sleep, accelerating your cellular aging, dissolving collagen, fueling inflammation, and depositing visceral fat. This is not your fault. This is a biochemical reality that responds, often dramatically, to targeted intervention. If anything I have said today changed how you see your own experience, if you recognized yourself in Margaret's story, or Diane's tears, or in those 3 a.m. awakenings, then know that understanding this is the first step, and the path forward is real and accessible. If this video changed something in the way you understand what is happening to your body, I ask you to subscribe to this channel so you do not miss what is coming next, because we have so much more to uncover together. And please, share this with a woman in your life who is lying awake tonight wondering why she is falling apart. She deserves to know the truth, and you might be the one who gives it to her.